In this video I'm going to be showing you how to make a research poster in Adobe InDesign. So first let's get familiar with the interface of Adobe InDesign. These down here are the tools that you'll be using. Essentially each one gives your mouse a different property. So this one here, this is the selection tool. This allows you to just pick objects up and move them around. I'm going to press Ctrl and Z to undo what I just did. The shortcuts are basically the same as in any other piece of software. Ctrl and Z is undo, Ctrl C is copy, Ctrl V is paste, Ctrl X is cut. The other tool you're probably going to be using is the Type tool. This allows you to, if you click on some blank space, it will click on some blank space and drag, it will create a type box which you can type into, and then going back to the selector tool you can then move that around and resize it however you want. I'm going to delete that by pressing delete. The other tool you'll most likely be using is this, the rectangle tool. This lets you just draw rectangles. You can use these as templates for all sorts of things that I'll show you later, but I'm just going to delete that one for now. And if you right click on it, you can also draw circles or polygons. The other important thing is over here on the right. This lets you edit the properties of whatever object you currently have selected. So here, I have a bunch of swatches. What swatches are essentially is just a block of colour. And if I click on an object and then choose a swatch, let's choose this blue. It changes to that colour. I'm just going to Ctrl Z to undo that. Now I have all of these colours here that I've loaded in. You can load in custom colours in InDesign. The way you do that is you go to this little hamburger at the top right here, and then you go load swatches. Now I've put all the resources I need into this one folder, which is generally good practice whenever you're doing graphic design. Now this is an ASE file. This will be attached to the bottom of the video, so you can download it yourself, but these are all of the colours that the university uses. You recognise them from the posters, so there's that dark blue that's the banners, and pink and teal. You can also edit an object's colour using the colour thing here, which lets you just drag and drop these sliders. It's in CMYK, which is a format of colour. You can also edit its stroke. Now stroke is a word that Adobe generally uses in its software to mean basically outline. So wherever you see the word stroke, that's its outline. Now that we're familiar with the interface, let's set up a new document. You can do this by going to File, New, or just pressing Ctrl and N. Now because it's just a poster, we only want one page. Now there are ways to make it bigger, but generally I would just do A4 or A3 when you're making a poster, because you can blow it up and shrink it however you want. The important thing is that it's the right ratio, and A3 is just a smaller version of the A0 that you'll be printing in. Now the best way to do this is to have two columns. So set that to 2. As you see in the poster behind me, it creates two distinct columns with a gap in between them. That gap is called a gutter. You can set this to whatever you want. I'm just going to leave it as 5mm. And margins refer to how far away from the edge of the page the columns are. So I'm going to leave that as the default. So if I click OK, it makes me a page like this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the rectangle tool, and if we go up to the top left corner, try and get as close in there as you can, and just click and drag. And you'll notice a couple of these lines sort of popping up as I move past them. These are called guides, and essentially when you're near them, your mouse will kind of snap to them. These are useful for positioning things exactly. And we're just going to do it so that this rectangle covers the entire page. So you can see these green lines showing that it's the same size as the page. So when we release, it's currently invisible because it's got no fill. It does have a black outline. This up at the top here is another way to do these two down here, by the way. Now what I'm going to do is go into my resources folder with everything I'm going to need for this project, and I'm going to pick this background image. This is just a picture of the computer labs. So I'm going to drag and drop it, and I'm going to drag and drop it onto where I've just drawn this rectangle rather than onto just blank space. You see the window lights up a little bit. So when I release, you can see it's dropped it inside that rectangle. So it's now confined to that. So if I go back to my selector tool, if I reduce the size, you can see the actual image behind doesn't change. It just sort of changes which bits of it you can see. Just Control and Z out of that. Now if you double click, now you can change the actual size of this image. So you can see I can stretch it up and down. And basically this is probably the best way to insert images in a shape that you want them to be. So if I double click just in blank space now, it sends me back to the kind of default view. So if I click back onto this selects the whole thing, the rectangle and the image. Once it's positioned in a way you're happy with, I think I'm quite happy with how it's just started off. You just click Auto Fit, and now when you resize it, see it actually resizes it rather than just resizing the window. So I think this is a pretty good background, but it needs to be a lot less visible because it is ultimately a background. I don't want it to distract from the content. So what I'm going to do is up at the top here, you have opacity. So this decides how transparent something's going to be. So at the moment it's 100%, so it's just completely opaque. But if I turn this down, you can see it gets fainter and fainter because it's on a white background. So let's turn it down to, let's say, 25%. There we go, now that's much less visible, so that's going to be much less distracting from the content we want people to see. So if we just click anywhere to deselect that, and now we go back into our rectangle tool, we're going to make a header. Actually no, sorry, text tool, not rectangle tool. So what we do is, just like when we drew the background, we click in the top left corner and it'll kind of snap to it. So you go down as far as you want your header to go basically, and then you just drag along all the way to the other end of the screen. I think about there is going to be a good size for it. So now it's created a text box that I can type into. Now here's where it gets a bit complicated. There's essentially two ways to interact with a text box. You can do so using the text tool, which allows you to edit whatever you're typing in there. And you can see up here where that color and stroke menu was before, we now have this T. So this changes the color of the text and the outline around the text. If we use the selector tool to select the same text box, we get a totally different window up here. That's because interacting with things as objects and interacting with things as text is different in Adobe InDesign. So to change the background color, we need to interact with it as an object. So let's use the swatches that we loaded in earlier, and let's pick a color for our banner. I think we're going to need to load them in first. So you just go open, and they appear like that. I think the darkest blue in the university color scheme is going to be the best one for this. So what we do is you go up to here, find that blue, minimize that, so we can set it as the outline. We also set it to have no outline. Okay, so now we have this banner that's just kind of a blue box. Now you can click on it with the text tool to edit the text inside it, or you can just double click it like that. Just like in Microsoft Word or any other program you use, you'll have all these text options. So you can set the font, let's set it to Verdana, because I quite like Verdana. Verdana bold. You can change the size. Let's see how 36 looks. That's not bad, but I think a little bit bigger. 48 maybe. That's good. You can change the color of the text. Let's just set it to white. And you can change the alignment. So let's put it in the middle. Now if we go back to the selection tool and just click off it. See, the problem now is that it's right at the top. There's no margin whatsoever. So what we do is we select the object again, press Ctrl and B to open the text frame options. So now what we can do is change the margins. Just as the page has margins, this object has margins. Now when I click on one, they all increase, and when I click down again, they all decrease. I'm going to just click preview so that you can see. So things move closer in. Now what I'm going to do is put a margin of about 5 all around it. And then this little chain link symbol, this means that they're all linked. When I unclick that, you can see I can move just the top up and down. So I'm going to use that to position the text about where I want it. I think about 8mm looks good. So when I click OK, these margins stay in place. So if I double click, just like in Word, I can continue to edit the type. It's not limited to all being one font, so let's put in my name and just any other researchers involved in the project. Now if I select that, I think I'm going to keep the font as Verdana, but I'm going to set it to be italic rather than bold. And I'm going to decrease the size quite a lot. I think 24 is quite a good size for all of the names. And if I go back to the selection tool, now you can see these lines kind of seem to be getting in the way of how it looks. So at any time, so long as you've got nothing selected, if you press Shift and W, you can preview how the finished project's going to look. Now I think I need a little bit more border up at the top there. So let's click back on, Control and B, and let's just turn that up to, I think 13 is good because that's in line with the default page margins. So if I go OK. So now we still have this problem that these columns go right up to the top of the page, but your content's only going to come up to about here. So what I'm going to do is, if I go to Layout, and then Margins and Columns, just like before, I'm going to click to unlink them. And if I increase just the top margin, you can see this moves down because I'm increasing the distance away from the top of the page. So let's just keep going up until, I think 65. Yeah, that seems like a good margin. Let's go OK. So now that we've got your name and your project name, let's add some content. So I'm going to use the Type tool again. Going over to the top left corner. Now because these are guides, your mouse will snap to them, as long as you're close enough. So try and get quite close to the corner. Now drag it over to this other guide over here, the end of the column. Now this is just going to be a header, so let's make it quite long, quite thin. Okay, so this will be the header for your introduction section. Just write the word introduction, change the font and everything to how I want it. Let's go for Verdana bold, size maybe, I think 30 looks nice. Now if we press B, Control and B, just like before, we have the same window, so we can edit the margins. So let's link them all together and put, yeah, 2, maybe 3mm of padding. And then there's vertical justification. This is just the alignment, but along the other axis. So if I go center, you see it moves to the middle of this box rather than the top. So let's just go OK. And now let's select it with the selection tool so that we can edit its fill. So let's go up here and let's set it to the same dark blue as the header. Now we have the problem that the text isn't very visible against it. So if we double click, select the text and set the text color to be white. Let's go back to the selection tool and just click off it. And I think that's quite a nice looking header. So now for the place where you're going to put your actual content. So let's use the type tool. Try and get it right in that corner. And just draw another box of about the size that you're going to want it to be. You can change this later, so you don't have to be too exact. The important thing is that it's the right width, so you can see that green line coming up there. Once again, change the font to whatever you want. Let's just do Verdana regular, and let's put it at size 11. See how that looks. Now that's maybe a bit small. Let's put it back up to 12. Another important text formatting option, which you sometimes see in other software but not often, is you can put a gap before or after each paragraph. So if the text just runs over onto the next line, then it won't put this gap in, but if you press enter to start a new paragraph, it will. So generally I like to have maybe 3 millimeters after and maybe 1 millimeter before. So once again, let's go Control and B and set our margins to be what we want. So let's put it to 3 millimeters this time. Okay, so if we go back to the selection tool, now let's get a background for this section. I think if we go to Fill, and I think let's set it to white. Deselect. Now that looks okay, but I'd quite like to have a semi-transparent background. If I click onto this and change the transparency, just as I did with the background, one thing you'll notice is that the text becomes transparent too. The way around this is if you go to Window and make sure that the Effects is ticked, it brings you up this. Now I've got mine already there, but basically if you click and drag this window onto this sidebar, you can put it there basically for your convenience. And then you can just click it at any time to open the effects window. This is quite handy because it lets you see the opacity of the text, the fill, and the stroke. So if we double click on fill, it opens this window here. And now, let's turn the preview on so you can see it as it happens. If we turn the opacity down, it's just the opacity of the background, not the text. So let's put it, I think 85 actually looks pretty good. Let's just leave it like that. So it's 85% opacity. And if we click off, there we go. I think that looks quite nice. We'll maybe move this a little bit down. Make the header a little bit bigger, so it's got a bit more space around it. Now, one trick I like to use for my introductions is when you're citing a study, so let's start a new paragraph, and you can see I've got that 3 millimeter gap now. This is Parsons et al. 2018. And just say what they found. And preferably spell findings correctly. What I sometimes like to do is have a little picture of the author's face next to the title of their study. So if I go to the selection tool, click off. Now if I go to the rectangle tool, and as I showed you before, right click it and select the ellipse tool. So now we're going to be drawing circles. There are a few things you can do. So you can just click and draw a circle in whatever shape you want. Let's undo that. Or you can press and hold Shift and you'll draw a perfect circle starting from the left corner. Press Z. If you press and hold Alt and click, you'll draw a circle starting from the middle in whatever shape you want. And if you press and hold Shift and Alt and click, you'll draw a perfect circle starting from the middle. This is usually the most useful one. So let's draw a circle of just any size. And get rid of its outline here, so change its stroke color to none. Then go back to the selection tool. Now, just as we did with the background, we're going to grab an image. So let's get this picture of my face and drag it onto this circle. So then it'll exist within the circle. Now it's not a very big image, so it's not filled the whole thing. So let's double click on it. Now just as you did with the circle, if you press Shift and Alt and hold them down as you resize things, you'll resize them from the middle rather than the top left, and you can keep them in the exact same aspect ratio as they were before. So I think about here. Yeah, I think that's quite nicely spaced. It'll look really horrible and pixelated on here, but we are going to decrease the size. So if I double click here, so now when I click on it, if I resize the circle, you can see it doesn't resize the image, just like with the background. So if I set it to auto fit and then resize the circle, that's much better. So it resizes with it. Now the problem is that we now have kind of a floating object, but we want it to be in line with the text. So what I'm going to do is press Ctrl and X to copy it and delete it. Double click on here to edit this text, and then just paste it into the text like you would in Microsoft Word. And let's put a tab after it, maybe just a couple spaces. Now what this means is that this is in line with the text. So if I do a couple of backspaces, you can see it moves down just as text would. So now I go to the selection tool, click on that again, press Ctrl and plus to zoom in. Now I can edit its size quite precisely. So what I want is for it to be about the same size as the text. I think I've changed my mind. I want the text to be a little bit bigger than 12 now. Let's put it at, say, 14. Yeah, I think that's good. Click here. One thing to be wary of is that when you click this circle, it'll take you straight to the image as if you double clicked it. So generally avoid doing that. So when I minus out again, you can see I have this quite nice little face next to Parsons et al. And then just using your usual text formatting skills. Let's say make that bold so they can see the name of the study really easily. Get rid of that semicolon. And I think that's pretty good. So now that we have an introduction, let's make a method section. So you can just make another text box, but I think the best thing to do is to just click that, press and hold Shift, and click the other one, so you've selected both of them. And then just Control and C to copy, Control and V to paste. So if I move this up and down, you can see these little green arrows. They're kind of suggested guides. So if I let go here, it's sort of recommending that I put it about that distance, but I think I'd like it a little bit more spaced out. Maybe about here. So then you click off it. Now if you just double click here, you can just edit this text to say method. And if you double click here, we can delete the picture we made earlier, just as we would any other character. And let's go back to here. So usually at the top of my method section, I'll have my sample. I think that's quite an important thing to state. But obviously this is all kind of personal preference at this point. But I'm going to put in a heading that just says sample. And I'm going to center it. And backspace. Character terms. So what I could do is just write, 10 male, 10 female, 1 binary. So this gives you an idea of the gender demographic. But I think there's probably a more kind of graphically pleasing way to do this. So what I'm going to do is delete all that. And instead, I'm going to insert a table. Now when you're on a text object, it'll say Insert Table. If you're in the Selection tool and you just click off, it'll say Create Table. Basically this is the same as the difference between a floating image and an inline image. So inserting a table will put the table in line with all of your content. Creating a table, you kind of draw a box and the table exists within it. So we're going to want to insert a table. And we don't want any headers on it. We just want 3 columns with 1 row. So we go OK. So I have these 3 boxes now. This is another trick for kind of doing shorthand for male and female. If you go and search character map, in the Programs panel. This comes on any Windows PC, probably Macs as well. Make sure that Advanced View is ticked, and you go search for male. And here you can see the male and female symbols. So what you do is you select both of them, and then copy, and that puts it in your clipboard. So now when you go back into InDesign, you just Control and V. Now because I'm using Verdana, it doesn't have a symbol for male and female in this font, or well, Minion Pro, the default font. So what we're going to do is just cycle through until we see one that does. So Lucida Sans Unicode. So now we actually have a male and female symbol here. So all we need to do is take one of them, Control and X, go into the other cell, Control and V. So now we can say we have 10 females, 10 males, and let's just use NB for non-binary. And we have one person who is non-binary. Put some spaces in between them. And now we can format this however we want. So let's say, just as in Excel by the way, if you there's a difference between selecting the whole cell and just selecting bits of text. So let's just select that, keep that as Lucida Sans. There's no option for bold because it's a symbol. And let's set this 10 to be Verdana like all our other text. Let's just set it to Verdana regular. And now let's copy this on the others. So let's increase the size a little bit. And then set this one to be Verdana. And this one I think we'll do in italic, just to make it clear that NB is a symbol and not the letters NB. And let's put that into Verdana as well, for consistency's sake. So up to 14. So if we go back to the selection tool, it looks alright, but now the table has got this border around it which looks a bit ugly. So let's select all of it. And here we go. So the stroke is set to black. So what we need to do is set it to none. Now if you click back onto it, it's got rid of the outside border, but not the inside borders. So what we need to do is select each cell. Now it says question mark because it's got different strokes on each side. So let's just set it all to be none. So it's nice and clean and simple. So if we click here and off. So there's still this blue line around it, but if I press Shift and W again to look at that preview, you can see there's no lines. So when I press Escape, if I select this table again, I think it's definitely going to be a good idea to have the text be centered. And I'd also like to have it a bit smaller, but currently it's just the full width of the container it's in. The way you change the width is this, the column width. So currently each column is 42.433 millimeters long. So let's just turn this down. And as you can see, they all kind of move in towards one another because the entire table is centered. Let's put it at 23. And if I click enter, then I can just continue typing after it. And that stays there. So as well as a sample, you probably want something about your procedure, what else, maybe your design, equipment used. And from here it's just basic text formatting, so you would just set it to regular, you put your content here. What I sometimes find is a good idea is to, on your headings, remove this gap and remove the gap above it. I think that just looks a bit nicer, it just kind of makes it clear which headings are assigned to which text, but again, that's just personal preference. In general, I think it's best to do more things like this table when you're doing a poster, because I think the less you say in words, the better. So whenever you can use a diagram, you should. And it's also important to use color to highlight important information. So for example, let's take this NB and make it a kind of purpley blue. Let's take this male symbol and make it university teal, and the female symbol university pink. So that quite clearly communicates the information right away. Now if we go to the selection tool, scroll over and zoom out, yeah, that's looking pretty good. Not much content on there, but that's okay, this is only demonstration. So let's, like we did with the introduction, select the method header, select method body, Control and C, Control and V. And then we'll move it over to the second column now, double click on the header to edit the text, and this will be our findings. So let's delete everything we've written for method. What I like to do with findings is I have nice and big, bold italics, what analysis you did. So let's say two-way repeated measures and over. So that's right up at the top there, so there's absolutely no confusion about what you've done. Let's go out of that. And next, I think let's do another table like we did for the gender demographics of the sample. So let's go table, insert table. And because it's two-way repeated measures, that means we're going to have two factors. So that'll be two columns. And let's say the most levels any factor is going to have will be 3. So we'd want 4 body rows, one including the name of the factor. So let's go OK. And then we've got a table. So let's say factor 1, factor 2, and then level 1, level 2, and let's say factor 2's got 3, level 1, level 2, level 3. Go back to the selection tool, let's zoom in. Now once again we've got these annoying borders, so let's get rid of them in the same way as before. So select the whole table, no borders, and then we just select each cell and do the same thing. This can get a bit tedious, so I'm going to fast forward through it. Okay, so now let's put some color on this table. Let's make the headings in, let's not use the same blue, let's go for something a bit different. Let's go for a slightly lighter blue. Oh, sorry, I've just accidentally changed the stroke by mistake. Let's use that one. Let's go for a lighter blue. And then let's do a really light blue for this. Now let's change the text color here to be white, and the same here. And let's also change the font. Minion Pro is the default font in most Adobe software, but we've been using Verdana, so I'm going to keep things consistent. Now, same as with the gender thing, we will make it a bit smaller because it doesn't need to be that wide. Let's see, yeah, I think that's pretty good. Let's just center all the text within it. So we just set the alignment to center. And let's zoom out. Yeah, I think that's nice. So now, double clicking to edit the text again, let's just go down here. Now we can insert a graph to show our findings. So back into my resources folder, here's an Excel file with all of my findings in it. Okay, now we're in Excel. So here's my findings. These are just some random numbers I generated, and here are my factors. So all we have to do, once we've made our graph in Excel, copy the graph, come in here, make sure you're on text editing, not on the selection tool, and just go Control and Paste, or Control and V to paste. Now what you'll see, it doesn't appear, but if I go to the selection tool, now you can see this plus here. What this means is that this text box contains content that's bigger than it, so it won't show up. So let's minus out a little bit, and let's just make this text box really tall. Now you can see it because it's now within the bounds of the text box. So using that Alt-Shift trick again, let's resize it to be more in line with the other content. That was my mistake. I didn't click Auto Fit, so it's just resized the window, not the image. So let's undo. And this time, click Auto Fit and resize. There we go. So now we've inserted a graph. There are some things you can do on the effects panel that kind of make it look a little bit nicer how it's been placed. So if we click Effects, which we put here earlier, and click this little FX button, this lets you add a load of just cool effects to it. It's worth having a play around with them, but let's put a drop shadow on it. So you can see already, because I've got preview enabled, that just put this little shadow on it so it looks like it's floating up above the screen a little bit. Let's make it a little bit less opaque, and let's make it look a little bit closer, so just 1 millimeter off, so it's very, very slight. But that gives it that little kind of more professional look to it. So now double clicking to edit the text again. Now we just add in whatever our finding was, so you know, F for whatever equals whatever your F value is, you know, P greater than 0.05, whatever it is you found, you just put that at the bottom. And that's quite a nice, concise finding section, I think. You're of course welcome to do more, but again, the more you can show using diagrams and really simple imagery, the better. So generally just a summary of what analysis you did, and then your graph, any tables, and just your final statistical output is usually sufficient for a finding section. Next, let's do this again where we shift select both boxes, copy and paste, and then move into the column using the rulers to snap it in place. And let's align it to about what we want. That was a bit of a glitch there. So there's about, you want to keep about the same amount of distance here as here. So let's double click findings, rename that discussion. Yeah, so that's Control A to select everything in a text box, by the way. So the discussion, I would say is fairly free form, just like the introduction. You just put whatever content you want in there. And let's change that to regular. Yeah, so it's really up to you how you do this. But again, using kind of powerful imagery, putting little pictures in, that can be really helpful. So let's, because we haven't used it yet, let's use the polygon tool, and let's just put in a polygon in the bottom corner here. Now, if you go to the select tool, as well as resizing it, you can also rotate it, and that can make it look a bit more exciting, really. So let's move it over to here, and keep in mind you can always have things go off the page. That's not a big deal at all, it just won't print it. So let's go back into my resources folder and pick a nice image. So let's say this was an experiment about gambling. I'll put in an image of some playing cards here. Now obviously the playing cards have come in really big because it's a really big image. It's as big as this orange line shows. But all we do is we double click it like we did before, and then pressing Shift and Alt, just shrink it down to size. Position it however we like. Oh, double click again, sorry I just clicked on the hexagon by mistake there. Let's not have any of the grounding, let's just have this jack. Double click off and click back on. Now when we click auto fit, once we're happy with it, see we can resize that however we want. Let's make that nice and big, make it more eye-catching. Let's have the discussion. Bit of a conflict here. So sometimes things will be on top of one another and you'll go to click a resize button and accidentally click the element below it. So let's resize that, move that back into place. Now one thing it's missing still is references. So what we're going to do, another text box, go down to the bottom, keep it kind of on this line so that it snaps, and then we just drag and drop over to the other end so you get these green lines, and then down to the bottom. Now let's go back to the selection tool. We'll set the color to be, I think, the lightest grey in the university color scheme, maybe second lightest. Yeah, I think that's good. Now of course our columns still overrun into it. So let's go to layout, margins and columns, making sure it's unlinked. We just increase the bottom ones to move the bottom margins of the column up a little bit. And actually I think I made this a bit too big, so let's shrink it down a bit. And see those green lines will just help you snap things into place so they all kind of look deliberate. And I think I've changed my mind on the colour. Let's make it a bit brighter. There we go. And now just double click to edit the text and set it to our preferred font. It's generally a good idea to not use more than 2 fonts in a design, just aesthetically speaking. So let's do regular, so it's just, you know, Parsons et al, okay, whatever. Your references really can be as small as you like. The important thing that people need to see, be eye-catching, is all above it. The references are kind of just there to protect you copyright-wise. So let's turn them down to, say, 10 points, make them really tiny. And just to make this look a bit nicer, let's, in the selection tool, back on this text box, just go Control and B, and let's just put 3 millimeters of spacing on there. And now the last thing to do is basically just arrange it however you want. A few things to keep in mind. If you right-click on things, there'll be this Arrange option. So just like you'll have used in Microsoft Word or anything, you can bring it to the front, send it to the back, bring it forward 1, back 1. So if I go send to back, it sends this object right to the very back. So that's behind the background. Now I don't want to do that, so we'll just bring it back. But generally things will be, you know, presented in the order that they were drawn. So the references box here covers up this image, but I can select the image, go arrange, and then bring to front, and then that appears above the referencing box. So let's go back to this one that I made earlier and just compare it. Yep, I think I got everything in there, didn't forget anything. Apart from the logo and the number. So that's the final thing to remember. So you'll need to have the university logo, preferably in the top right corner, but in theory anywhere. And you'll also need to have your particular group's number if you're an RS2 poster, or your number if you're a dissertation poster. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to draw another square just up here, and then going back into our resources folder. This is the university logo in portrait and white. So we'll drag that on. And once again, it's a big image, so it's come in its original size. So let's just shrink it down to be the same size as that box. Let's try that again, because it seems to be coming backwards. Yeah, you can flip things back and forth by essentially just crossing these over. So I think I just accidentally did that while I was resizing it. So then we've got a logo there. And then finishing touch, let's just get a circle and do that. Now let's let these guiding lines kind of line it up. So that's lined up with the top of the logo. Now if we go back to the select tool, let's keeping Shift and, well, originally Shift and Alt while you were drawing it, just Shift now. If we drag this corner, yeah, so we want it to line up. Oh dear. It can be a bit fiddly sometimes. Yeah, so we want it to line up with the bottom of that logo. So they're going to be the same size. Now let's just set, no line around it. And set the fill to be a different color. Let's say maybe this light blue. Yeah, that looks all right. So now what we do is we get our type tool again, and we just click on that circle, and it'll just add some text into it. So we'll center the text, pressing Control and B again to get at the text frame options. Let's set the alignment to be center. And is there anything else we want to do? No, I think that's good. And then all we do is put your number in. Let's say number 1. Now what we do is select, we've got the type selected, let's change the color. And let's make it nice and big. Maybe even bigger. And correct font. Back to select all. And now if we press Shift and W again to look at preview, I think that's a pretty good looking poster. So all you have to do to save it, I would usually go Save As, just for safety. Now you can save, I would recommend saving the InDesign document itself, because this means that you can edit it a lot more easily. But you can also save it, so when you use Save As, it will save it as InDesign documents. But if you use Export, then you can export it as a PNG or JPEG image, or preferably an Adobe PDF, because this is going to let it resize infinitely without pixelating all the images. So you save it to save your work, and then to make it a poster that you can print, you save it as a PDF. So you just name it whatever you like, and then you print it the way you would print any other PDF document. So yeah, that's how you make a poster in Adobe InDesign.